One of the most important keys to learning and mastering Photoshop is using the Layers panel. Sometimes a Photoshop file with a lot of graphics is called a composition. Each graphic or other element can be on its own layer. This means each graphic can be modified independently of all the other graphics in the same Photoshop file. Layers are important because you can have each graphic on its own layer, and each graphic can be modified independently of one another. That means that none of your original images can get destroyed. You also have complete control over each layer and can do special effects per layer, like change the opacity mode, add blending effects, and much more. Okay, let's get started learning about the layers. With our layersdemo.psd document open, the first tool that we're going to need to work with is actually the Move tool, so let's select that now. As with any Adobe application, whenever you select a tool, the first thing that you need to do is look up here in the Control panel and see if there are any settings that might need to be changed before you work with the tool. One thing that I'm going to recommend that we do is go right over here to Auto Select. This is a great feature, and it makes it very intuitive to work with Photoshop, because with Auto Select turned on, that means you can select your graphics right here on the workspace and actually move these guys around. Now, if you're new to Photoshop, you're thinking, well, shouldn't it be that way? Well, yes, it should. But a long time ago, we'd actually have to go over to the Layers panel and make a selection here and then manipulate the items on the workspace. But anyway, turn on Auto Select and you won't have to worry about that. Now, for this Photoshop document, we have 3 layers over in the Layers panel. Alright, so each one of these are discrete items, and you may notice over to the left of each layer, there's an eyeball that indicates layer visibility. If you click right here on this eyeball, the object temporarily disappears from your workspace. It's not gone forever, it just kind of gets out of the way, so we'll turn that back on. Another thing to be aware of is the stacking order in the Layers panel. Whichever objects appear on the top of the stacking order actually appear on top of one another here in the workspace as well. We notice how our pug is positioned on top of our other dog, right? Well, if we wanted to put the other dog on top of the pug, we simply go over to the Layers panel, click once on the layer thumbnail, and drag the other dog to the top and position him on top of the pug. And now we've changed the stacking order, and this dog appears on top of the pug. Now, this particular file has 3 layers. We have the dog in grass, the generic layer 1, and layer 0. If you create a brand new Photoshop document, you won't have that. You'll just have one background layer. Let me show you that real quick, and then we'll cancel out and move on. Let's go to the File menu, and let's choose New. We'll accept the defaults for now because these don't really matter right now. And let's click OK. This is our new document, and what you're going to notice here is one locked background layer. Some layers can be locked, and this prevents you from accidentally moving or editing what's on that layer. Now, it's okay to have a locked background layer for the most part for a lot of different projects, but sometimes, especially if you open a JPEG, you'll need to unlock this background layer so you can manipulate the contents. That's very easy to do. If you simply double-click anywhere on the background layer, Photoshop is going to ask you to rename it. You can leave it the default layer 0 and click OK, or you could have renamed it. By doing that, whatever you need to do on this layer is perfectly fine because it's editable. We'll just leave this document here for now, and let's go back over to Layers Demo. Now let's make some adjustments to the different layers. We have the dog and grass selected, and we know that we can move this guy around. You may notice, since every object is on its own layer, you can do things to that layer independently of the other layers. For example, dog and grass is selected here. Let's take a peek to the top of the Layers panel here and see some of the things that we could do. We can actually change the blending mode. There's a whole list of different blending modes. Blending modes allow you to have a lot of creative flexibility, and the way this works is when you apply a blending mode, the layer that gets the blending mode changes to interact with the layer underneath it. Let's see what that means. Let's go down this list just a little bit and maybe choose Multiply. Notice that when we put the Multiply blending mode on our dog in grass layer, it becomes a little bit transparent and you can actually see through it as it mixes with the pug. Let's go back up to normal. So changing the blending mode on a per layer basis is definitely a way to get very creative effects with your layers. Another thing that you can do is change the opacity on a per layer basis. Notice that our dog and grass is still selected and the opacity is set to 100%. If we wanted to make our dog and grass a little bit more transparent, well, we would pull the opacity slider over to the left. What you'll notice is the dog and the grass now becomes more transparent and you can see through that layer. Well, let's slide that back over to 100%. And let's deselect by clicking right down here in the gray area. Let's continue looking around in the Layers panel. As you work with Photoshop, a lot of times your Layers panel will get very long because you'll have so many parts of your Photoshop document. It's a good idea to rename your layers to things that make more sense rather than keeping just the generic layer 1 and layer 2. To rename a layer, simply double-click on the name of the layer, and then you can change the name. So layer 1, let's just rename this layer to Pug, and then click Enter or Return on your keyboard. Keeping your layers named, of course, will make more sense in the long run when you have a long document and you're trying to keep things organized. Another thing that's very common in Photoshop is to duplicate a layer. For instance, if we were about to modify the pug, right? If we wanted to change his eye color or perhaps run some kind of filters or some kind of artistic effect on our pug, well, chances are that we might change our mind later. It's a good idea to make a backup copy of a layer before you start working on it. One quick way to do that is to be sure that the layer is selected, and then simply take the layer and drag it to this icon right here to the left of the trash can, and that duplicates your layer. Now, our new pug or our pug copy is directly on top of our pug. One thing that you're really going to need to remember is to always be sure that the correct layer is selected before you start making edits. It's very important as you learn to work with Photoshop that you always keep your attention focused on the Layers panel and not directly here on the workspace, and that takes a little getting used to. Chances are, when you do make a backup copy of a layer, you don't need it right away, so it's a good idea just to turn the visibility off and just kind of forget it's there unless you need it. You could even rename it Pug Backup. It's a good idea to always have a backup copy of your original image. So if you make modifications to, say for instance, the pug, and maybe later you change your mind, not a problem. You can always recover with your backup copy and then delete the one that you don't want. Speaking of deleting layers, well, how would you do that? Well, let's check it out. Let's duplicate dog and grass. Let's take this guy again and pull it down to make a duplicate copy. We'll pretend for now that we made some edits to this layer, and now we've changed our mind and we don't need it. Well, to get rid of it, just like we duplicated, we can delete. So we'll take the layer that we don't want anymore and drag it down and drop it on the trash can, and then that layer is gone. All right, we'll deselect. Now, if your Photoshop file starts to get tons and tons of layers, another great organization technique is to create folders. You'll notice right down here in the bottom of the Layers panel, you can create a new group. This is a way to organize your Photoshop layers. Let's click this icon here to create a new group. It creates a folder, and then you can put whichever layers you want in that folder, and notice the twisty here so you can close it up. Well, let's do that. Let's rename group 1. Let's double click here and name this guy Pugs, P-U-G-S, and enter or return. Now we have a folder and we can put all of our pugs in there, Pugs Copy and Pug. Let's first click Pug Copy, hold down your Shift key, and then click Pug. Both of these guys are selected, and now hold your mouse down and drop those up into your new group, and then we can close the twisty and notice that we have organized our Photoshop Layers panel a little better. Alright, and this is very handy when you get lots of layers. It is not uncommon for Photoshop files to have 20, 30, 40, even 50 layers sometimes, so you can see how this is a great tool for keeping things organized. While we're here, let me show you one other quick thing about the Layers panel. The layers that we've been working with so far, well, each of those contain an image. Layers don't necessarily have to have an image. They may contain text or simply be filled with color. Notice on the very bottom here, layer 0 is filled with white, and that's where the background color of our document is coming from. Let's select layer 0 and fill it with another color. With layer 0 selected, we can fill it with another color by going to the Edit menu and choosing Fill. When the Fill dialog box opens, we're going to be asked to select what we want to fill the background color with. It could be the foreground color. That color would be the same as this box right here on the top. The background color would be whatever we have selected here. We could select our own color from the Adobe color picker, so if we wanted a nice shade of red or any other color, we could get that from here. Let's cancel that for now. Other choices include patterns, and something that we'll talk about later that's kind of cool is the content aware fill, and we'll discuss that later, but that's super fun. For now, let's pick our own color. Let's go back to the Adobe color picker and maybe choose a nice red, and let's click OK. And when we choose OK here, we now see that layer 0 is a nice shade of red.